I have 3 children, and my oldest child has a developmental disability. When she came into my life, it was a very steep learning curve for me. She entered and has just taught me so much. And so the way that I really think about this session is, how do we actually make the vision happen? How can we move from having a vision to making it real in people's lives? We have found as a family that the idea of valued social roles have been absolutely critical when it comes to assisting our daughter to have a full, meaningful, and inclusive life. This material is largely drawn from the work of Dr. Wolfensberger. He is a person who had a very different vision for people with intellectual impairments and really started to lead us in thinking about how to provide different kinds of options. We've found as a family that before we could even begin to think about valued social roles, we needed to be very clear on what was the vision for our daughter. She's now 16. She actually has quite a good vision for herself. So she's really taken over, and she's actually wanting to do things that we kind of hadn't imagined. So she wants to go and get her driver's license, and she's going to go to university, and she's going to have a great job, and she's going to travel. Jonathan Swift says, vision is the act of seeing things invisible. So indeed, we need to be able to imagine things that do not yet exist. What's lacking in this day and age is a big vision. We want to encourage people to have rich, full, meaningful life in all of these different life spheres. People will talk about my son or my daughter, they're living in a group residence, and our vision is that we're going to make it more attractive. Well, that's good, but I say let's push ourselves, let's provoke our imaginations so that we can really think of a big vision. What really would be the ideal place for this person to live? Another example that I'm running into all the time is that people are oftentimes thinking about activities for people based on their interests, and of course that's a whole lot better than sitting and doing nothing, but one activity a week is very different from having a valued social role, where you have a variety of activities over a period of time, and you start to reap then the benefits that come with valued social roles. There are a number of obstacles that arise when we have a vision that can really dampen our spirits and sometimes, maybe get us to the point of, such discouragement that we give up. Very, very critical for us is that we know what are some of the obstacles out there so that we can articulate it, we can address it, and we can try to get around it, over it, through it, whatever. One thing that we are up against, which is a very harsh and difficult thing to think about, is that you and I both live in societies that devalue certain qualities and conditions. For example, oldness, having physical impairments, having cognitive impairments or intellectual impairments, being very impoverished, being dependent. These would be just some of the things in our society that are in fact very devalued. When people embody those kinds of qualities and characteristics that the society devalues, people become devalued. Not quite as worthwhile as, not as deserving as other citizens. There are some very powerful consequences that come when you in fact are devalued. Rather than seeing a whole person with an identity, a personality, likes, dislikes, dreams, and so forth, you become seen as your impairment. And this then leads to a deficit orientation where people cannot see the potential. They're literally just always focusing on the deficits. And of course, where do you think that kind of thinking leads to? One stream this way and the other stream this way, and it's a completely different life. And so, very logically then, when people are just focused on your deficits, they think that you need to be in special places with special people, special materials, and so people end up, being rejected. And part of that rejection is that they end up being distanced, so put apart and away, either physically or socially. Now, another part of this mindset is that oftentimes people get cast into negative roles. One role, very hard to think about, is that people are put into the role of not being fully human. It's largely done unconsciously, although sometimes it's quite conscious. A more subtle kind of example of this role is I recently was advocating with a family who were fighting for school inclusion for their daughter who is in primary school. And the parents were concerned because they felt that, their daughter really wasn't having an opportunity to develop friendships. And they raised this with the teacher. And the teacher looked at them and she said, well, I don't know why you're so concerned about that. I mean, I don't think she knows the difference of whether or not she has friends. Just one other example, I've been to day programs where literally people are spending their days doing nothing but sitting. To me, that's treating people as an object. That's, taking an object and placing it, and it stays there until I move. Kind of related to that is that people are put into the role of being an object of pity. Most of us want empathy, compassion, right? But we don't want pity. People are put into the role of being a burden, I'm still amazed at how many people assume that our daughter is a burden to us. We see her as such a wonderful person. Her brother and sister look up to her, as the older sister, and yet so many people, even to this day, will say to us, you don't want to burden your other kids. People are put into the role of being children. This is very true for people with intellectual impairments, children who will never grow up. I've seen many families who've been taught this. They were told, because of this impairment, this person will never progress beyond being 6 months old mentally. I've met families who embrace that idea, and it's very hard then to break out of it, years later and think something different. Another example of a negative role that sometimes people get put into, and that is the role of client. People literally will start to lose their identity and not even be referred to by name, but rather be referred to as clients. And I've actually had people say to me, well, what do you want me to call them? And I say, well, how about people I work for, right? Or, the people I support, or what about calling people by name? And really difficult to think about is that there is a role expectancy out there that people are, in fact, better off dead. My daughter has Down syndrome, and I know the likelihood is that in any given day, I will meet somebody who in fact may not be aware that they're thinking this way, but really do believe that people like my daughter would be better off dead, and that our society would be better off without her here. You can make the leap pretty easily to see how these kinds of role perceptions, how powerful they are and how they get in the way of the vision. We have to realize that these are in place so that we can then begin to address them and do everything we can to avoid family members getting trapped in these negative role expectancies, because they bring with them horrible consequences. They, of course, contribute to the distancing, when people are seen as being a menace or better off dead or ill, well then of course people think it's better for those kind of people to be apart and away from me. People get subjected then to all sorts of discrimination, abuse, violence, and even having their lives shortened or their deaths hastened. In contrast to this then, when we're thinking about moving forward, I'd like to now introduce the idea to you of valued social roles, the opposite of those devalued roles. One of the wonderful things about this idea is it's a concept that everybody can relate to because we all have social roles. This is a very good working definition given to us by a sociologist named Talcott Parsons, and he says, a social role may be defined as a socially expected pattern of behaviors, responsibilities, expectations, and privileges. So let's just get a sense of some valued social roles that come to mind. Can you call out some kinds of roles that are very typical in Australian society? Teacher. Leaders. Neighbor. Doctor, friend, sports fan, a member of a team, a grandparent. Okay, so these are all fairly common kinds of roles that you encounter in your society. And indeed, the concept of valued social roles has been present probably from the time you were born, or maybe even from before you were born. We've always had a vision of an inclusive lifestyle for our daughter. But to make it real, we had to then start to think about what are the valued social roles that would make sense for our daughter to enter into, and they have become a real anchor for us as a family. For example, when Mary this year moved into grade 10, we spent a lot of time together with her thinking about, okay, what's the role of a 10th grade student? We then, together, will help Mary to understand that role of a 10th grader. And so we literally will say to her, now in 10th grade, this is what you do. And when the teachers are struggling, sometimes they're saying, well, I'm not sure how we should do this, we always go back to, we say, well, how do you do this with the other 10th graders? Right? Well, now let's start there, and then we'll think about how would we adapt that for Mary. When we're talking about valued social roles, of course, if they're going to be valued roles, you're thinking about them in the context of the typical society. We're talking about inclusive lifestyles, and valued social roles is pathways to inclusive life. So we're not thinking about, starting with people who are in programs and what kinds of roles might they have within the programs. We're talking about within the context of the society, what kinds of valued roles, would really be roles that would be a good fit. Roles powerfully impact on having a rich, full, and meaningful life. And so one of the things I think most human beings want is we want to have some status and a good reputation. Well, where does that come from? Well, one place it comes from is the valued roles you have. When you think about rich, full, meaningful, inclusive life, a big part of that is having a positive reputation. A real concrete way that we can go about that is assisting the people we support or your family members to be in valued social roles. Another part of having a rich, full, meaningful life is to have a positive self-image. One very powerful source of helping people to have a positive self-image is to be in valued roles, and to develop some capacities, some capabilities, in those roles, and to get acknowledged for what they're doing well in those roles. When I think about this in terms of my daughter's life, for her to even have the possibility for her to be accepted in her high school, she must have the valued social role of being a typical student within her school. If she's in the life skills class, and she's known as one of the life skills kids, and that's how the kids in that class are thought of and referred to, that's the role they're put into, there's just no way that she's really going to be accepted in the larger student body. She will be accepted in life skills, but we're thinking here rich, full, inclusive lifestyle. So she's got to have that role to create the possibility. And some of the human service practices that we see taking place actually work against this, where people have an activity that they do once a week, and so they'll drop into the coffee shop and have some coffee, or they'll go swimming once a week at the local pool. Now, that's good. I don't want to, it's better than not doing anything, but in terms of the depth, of acceptance and belonging, it's just not going to happen when it's just an activity. People will never belong if they're just dropping in. In your valued social roles, you have an opportunity to meet lots of different people. We know that roles impact upon your autonomy and your freedom. So if you are seen, as an adult, for example, it's much more likely that you will be granted autonomy, that you will be given, there will be the mindset that you should be making choices about your life, and that you will have more freedom than if you're put into any of those negative roles that I talked about. Obviously, with roles come all kinds of opportunities for growth and development. Just reflect a little bit on the roles you've had in your life and how one role leads to another role, leads to another role, leads to another role, and the path continues to unfold. I feel very passionate about this for my daughter. I want to make sure that she has an opportunity to have many valued roles, because I know that those roles will open up lots of opportunities for her as she continues, throughout her life. We also know that valued social roles impact on the material side of your life, because if you are just dependent upon public subsidy, you're pretty vulnerable. Public subsidy changes with the political climate. When in fact we are really able to assist people to move into valued social roles, these will be some of the benefits that contribute to full and inclusive lifestyles. How would you go about assisting someone to really start to move into and grow into valued roles? And one thing I want to say, because I do have some providers here, this is not a program, okay? So it's not about saying, boy, have we got some valued social roles in mind for you, and you're going to like them no matter what. It's very much, this kind of a process of really getting to know a person well. And this is where, of course, family are so critical and important. If you think about your own life, when you are in a role that really gives you an opportunity to use your gifts, it's usually a very good fit for you. This is a great privilege as a parent, and also when I worked in services as a professional, to walk alongside of people on their life's journey, to be able to open up possibility and opportunities so that people could find and develop their interests. And how does that concretely happen? In the valued social roles we have.